Boys, it's chinned. Look at this piece of shit right here. Lopez versus Volk 2 happening this weekend. It's a dog shit fight. I'm upset about it as a Volk fan. I'm sure a lot of other Volk fans are upset about it. And it makes no fucking sense. It's one of the worst title fights in the history of the UFC as far as how undeserved a title shot is for a challenger. It makes no sense at all. Lopez just fought Gene Silva, who at the time was ranked, I believe, in the double digits 10, 11, 12, whatever it was. And sure, he won by impressive KO. But you have Volk, who just fought Lopez in his last fight. This is an instant rematch for somebody who only has so many fights left. It makes no sense. And you have, even more so, Lerone Murphy and Movsar Evloev, who are just 10 times more deserving than people like Lopez. It makes no sense. I can't say it enough. It's one of the worst title shots ever given in the history of the UFC, and it made me think. I think this fight is completely fucking egregious. It pisses me off to no end. What are other title fights and title shots that were given that make no sense? Because we've had a lot of them lately, and the UFC's title booking should really be put into question, especially when the most recent example of this is O'Malley versus Merab 2. This was Merab coming off of a very, very comfortable decision win over O'Malley, which a lot of people went on to say that O'Malley won, but I mean, that would have been a robbery. I'm sorry. I understand the argument that maybe he won 2 rounds, but there's no way you can watch their first fight in its entirety and say that O'Malley won it, especially confidently, like some people say. It's ridiculous, in my opinion. And O'Malley only got this title shot because he would be a big pay per view draw if he won the belt again, somehow, some way. And Dana just wanted one more fight with him as champion at the headliner. One more fight. And it didn't work out. Merab ran through him like he should have. And I think this is one of the most undeserved title shots in the history of the sport. But you can bring it back a little bit to UFC 248, Adesanya versus Romero. Now, this is a unique case. Adesanya asked for this fight, and I understand if the champion asks for a scary contender, sure. If the contender's not able to get fights and stuff, and he's won a few, I understand it. You just push him up from wherever he is. But Yoel was coming off of losses that didn't make him look like a major title challenger. Now I understand he had the Paulo Costa fight, which was super super exciting, but when you have losses and you're considered a boogeyman, and I'm the number one Yoel Glazer of all time. I fucking love Yoel Romero. And I, even back then, I didn't really like this fight being booked purely because you have at the time, undefeated megastar in Adesanya, and you're having him fight a old, quote unquote boogeyman who was coming off of losses, who has a tendency to stand there and do nothing in fights. Yoel didn't deserve this fight, and it made no sense to be booked. It felt like stat padding for Adesanya's record. It still feels like stat padding for Adesanya's record, and it's a fraudulent title defense in my opinion. And a lot of people even think that Yoel won it. But regardless, this was undeserved. You can't deny it. This was totally undeserved, but not as undeserved as Usman versus Masvidal 2, which may be the worst title shot ever given. I mean, this was literally like the welterweight version of O'Malley versus Merab 2. Now I understand. You have to look at the first fight, and Masvidal saved a pay-per-view on Fight Island. He filled in for Gilbert Burns when he got injured. I understand. It was probably part of negotiations that if he lost badly, he'd get a rematch. But the fucking fight was terrible, the first one. It's just like Marab versus O'Malley. If the I understand. You have to bring your stars up and you have to have them headline. I understand. But if the first fight is dog shit and it wasn't close and it was just boring as shit the entire time, I fail to see how that's good for business. especially when it can completely diminish your stars. I mean, look at O'Malley now. He's not really talked about. It's all about Marab, Jan, and Umar right now. Even with O'Malley's win over Song, he didn't look overly impressive, and I think that Marab back-to-back title fight for O'Malley, I think that did his image in. And this kind of did the same thing for Masvidal, except in a much more brutal end for Masvidal when he got flatline KO'd in the KO of the year by Big Usman. I mean, what a way to end the hype of Masvidal in one of the most brutal KOs we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years in the UFC. Crazy and undeserved. Which brings me on to my next one, UFC 307 Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. This fight, in my opinion, is one of the funniest bookings I've ever seen in my life, purely because Khalil Roundtree beat Anthony Smith for a title shot. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure Anthony Smith was ranked like 13 or 14 when Khalil knocked him out. This is a fucking joke, man. And it felt like blatant stat padding for Pereira's title defense record. Like, it just. I don't care if the fight was good. I don't care if Khalil posed a threat. I don't care if he dropped him. I don't care if he was winning. Yo, he was winning a 3 round fight, bro. Yo, if this fight was 3 rounds, bro, Khalil would have won, man. Shut the fuck up, man. Holy fuck. The amount of people that say that piss me off. But regardless, it doesn't take away from how undeserved this title shot was. I like Khalil Roundtree as a fighter, for the record. He's fucking exciting as shit. I mean, why wouldn't you like him other than the fact that he's low key? He's low key a crybaby. But, you gotta look into these guys for their fights, and I like him for his fights, but this was just undeserved. You can't beat Anthony Smith and get a title shot, and if so, where the fuck's Johnny Walker's title shot, man? Where's Johnny Walker's title shot, man? Shit would have been fucking heat. Johnny Walker versus Alex Pereira. But like that's the caliber of fight this was. This is I don't understand this fight. This happened a while ago and I still don't understand why it happened. It's just a ridiculous booking. Um it was a banger and that's the only silver lining, but that's going to happen. It's fighting. Fights will be better than people think, especially at a championship level, but you know, it's just confusing. It's confusing why Dana keeps giving undeserved title shots. And my final, most egregious example of an undeserved title shot in UFC Championship history. It's an old one, but it's completely valid, especially if you know the context. Bisping versus Dan Henderson 2. This was Dan Henderson, I believe, 1-3 in his last four, an old aging American star against the most beatable middleweight champion in the history of the division. There is no question that Dana was trying to get Dan Henderson a belt before retirement to really prop him up and make some real cash. I mean, not to mention, I'm pretty sure Dan Henderson won this fight fairly clearly. I mean, I haven't watched it in a while, but I mean, Dan pieced him up. Dan pieced him up big time. Dan won this fight and it was a robbery. And I'm pretty sure Dan even was a plus 8 or 900 underdog. He was a mad. This would have been one of the biggest upsets in the history of the UFC, especially at the time. It probably would have been top 3 or 4. This is a ridiculous title fight to give. As I said, 1-3 in his last four. Old aging star, and Bisping was so beatable. And think about how this would have changed the lineage of this division if Henderson would have won. This is just terrible booking by Dana. And it's painfully obvious, aside from the Khalil fight, that these are all fights to get big stars titles and big stars headlining pay-per-views. Maybe Romero's not the biggest star, but it's stat padding for Adesanya. And same with Khalil, it's stat padding for Pereira. This is just terrible. And it's happening more and more. I mean, you look at these fights 204, 307, 261, 248, 316, and 325. That's three of these terrible title fights in the 300s, in the 300 numbers for these pay per views. They're becoming more and more constant. And it's not a good look, especially with the White House card coming up. where it is rumored that Russians won't be able to fight on it and Americans will have a large spotlight, obviously, as it should be. But it makes you think maybe Americans are going to be thrust upon title shots that they didn't otherwise deserve. It's going to be really interesting because clearly the UFC and Dana are trending towards what makes the most money. And they're pushing fighters that don't deserve it. And most of the time they get fucking slept or cooked completely. But you never really know with the nature of how fights are being booked these days. One would hope, though, with the recent trends, that the UFC can get their fucking shit together and stop booking terrible fights like Lopez and Volk happening this weekend. And if you guys want to see a more in depth breakdown on this main event coming up, I have my picks video up. And I am pissed. I go way more in depth about this title fight and a lot of the other good fights on the card, so go check that out. And this has been Chinned, the most undeserved title fights in the history of the UFC. Take it easy.